No, it is just the appetizer of the fourth season. We gotta continue.
I've always been drawn to stories about people digging too deep and finding something they were never meant to. There's something unsettling about it. One minute, it's just dirt and rock, and the next, it's a discovery that changes everything.
The team decides to open the coffin to look for further information.
So, I started looking into cases like this, and what I found was wild to say the least. From ancient ruins buried beneath modern cities to artifacts with no clear origin, history is full of digs that uncovered more than anyone expected.
Creation of a car park, the Santa Rosa car park, you have this discovery.
But some discoveries go beyond the usual mysteries, things so strange or unexplainable that they make you wonder if they should have been left alone. And the insane discovery of the Lascaux Caves is one of those cases. If you've ever had a curious dog, you'll rethink finding that annoying, because at least it didn't do what happened with a group of teenagers in France back in 1940. They were just trying to chase their dog, who conveniently went down a hole, only to end up discovering a cave filled with ancient art that had been hidden for 17,000 years. These kids weren't archaeologists. They weren't expecting to find anything. They were just following their dog near the village of Montignac, probably thinking, great, now we have to drag him out of some random hole. But when they crawled inside, they found themselves in an underground labyrinth with walls covered in massive, perfectly preserved paintings. I'm talking horses, bulls, deer, and even creatures like woolly rhinoceroses, animals that don't even exist anymore and haven't in a really, really long time. And this wasn't just some caveman scribbling. The shading, the depth, the movement, it was actual, skilled artwork. Word spread fast, and before long, the world realized just how big of a deal this was. Experts confirmed the paintings were legit, dating back to the Paleolithic era. That's older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge. These images were painted by people who had never seen a city, never farmed a single crop, just early humans trying to make sense of their world in the most human way possible, through art. At first, everything was great. Archaeologists studied it, history lovers admired it, and tourists poured in. But that was also the problem. By the 1950s, thousands of visitors were coming through every day. And guess what happens when you pack a bunch of sweaty, breathing humans into a sealed-off cave? Moldavian bacteria, condensation. The paintings, which had survived for tens of thousands of years untouched, suddenly started deteriorating because of us. By 1963, the damage was bad enough that France had to shut the caves down. No more tourists, no more school trips, just scientists desperately trying to stop the artwork from disappearing completely. And even today, they're still fighting that battle. The real Lascaux cave is off limits, but they built replicas, Lascaux 2 and Lascaux 4, so people can still experience what those kids stumbled upon that day. It's crazy to think about. One moment, a group of teenagers was just trying to rescue their dog. Next, they had uncovered one of the greatest archaeological finds in human history. While we're on the topic, I have to tell you guys about the time Soviet scientists decided to just keep drilling straight down to see what would happen, and found what we now know as the Kola Super Deep Borehole. Back in the 1970s, during the Cold War, both the US and the Soviet Union were obsessed with going higher, faster, farther, you know, space race and all. But while NASA was looking up, the Soviets decided to do the opposite. They wanted to see just how deep they could go, straight into the Earth's crust. So, in 1970, they started drilling in a remote part of Russia, and for the next 24 years, they just kept going. They called it the Kola Super Deep Borehole, and by the time they had to stop in 1994, they had reached over 7.5 miles deep. 12,262 meters, farther than anyone had ever drilled before. To put that in perspective, if Mount Everest was flipped upside down, the borehole would still be deeper. That's how far they went. Now, you'd think drilling this deep would just be a matter of getting through a lot of rock, but nope. The deeper they got, the weirder things became. First, they found microscopic fossils, plankton fossils to be exact, at depths no one thought life could have existed. These tiny, ancient organisms had been buried for hundreds of millions of years. Then, they hit water, which made no sense because they were way below any known underground reservoirs. The biggest surprise, though, the heat. Scientists expected it to get warmer as they went down, but by the time they reached their final depth, it was a blistering 356 degrees Fahrenheit. That was way hotter than their models predicted, and the equipment just couldn't handle it. But here's where things get even more bizarre. At some point, rumors started spreading that scientists had lowered a microphone into the borehole and recorded horrifying, echoing screams coming from the depths like they had drilled straight into hell. Of course, that was nonsense. The recording that circulated was just a hoax. But the idea stuck, and the Kola borehole became legendary as Russia's gateway to hell. Eventually, the project was abandoned, and today, the borehole is just a sealed-off, rusting metal cap in the middle of nowhere. But the discoveries from it were real. Fossils, water, extreme heat, all proving that we still don't fully understand what's beneath our feet. And if nothing else, it proves that the deeper we dig, the stranger things get. But not all strange things are on the scary side like this. In 2018, archaeologists started poking around near the Great Pyramids and pretty much hit the jackpot. Mummies, unlike ever seen before. A team of Egyptian archaeologists was digging around the Dashur necropolis, about 25 miles south of Cairo. Dashur is already famous because it's home to some of Egypt's oldest and most unique pyramids, like the Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid, both built by King Sneferu. But this time, they weren't after pyramids, they were looking for burials. And in August 2018, they found 8 ancient mummies, perfectly sealed inside limestone coffins. Now, finding mummies in Egypt isn't exactly shocking, it's kind of their thing. But what made this discovery special was how well preserved these mummies were. When the archaeologists cracked open the sarcophagi, they found the mummies covered in colorful, intricately designed casings made of cartonnage, a mix of linen or papyrus soaked in plaster, shaped into a human form, and painted with bright colors. 3 of them were in amazing condition, like they had just been wrapped up yesterday. Deep ochre and blue tones still covered their casings, showing off the skill and artistry of ancient Egyptian craftsmen. The mummies dated back to Egypt's late period, 664 to 332 BC, a time when the country was constantly fighting off foreign invaders but still holding on to its deep-rooted traditions. And burial was a big deal back then. Egyptians believed in preparing the dead for the afterlife with as much care as possible, and these mummies proved that even in a period of political instability, the art of embalming and funerary decoration was still going strong. By November 2018, word of the discovery had spread, and the mummies were carefully transported to a storage facility in Dashur for preservation. But the plan wasn't to keep them locked away forever. Egypt was in the middle of building new museums in Hurghada and Sharm el-Sheikh, and these mummies were set to be part of the exhibits, giving visitors a first-hand look at how ancient Egyptians honored their dead. It's discoveries like these that remind us just how much history is still hidden under the sands of Egypt. And it's not the only one. In January 2023, Egypt delivered again. This time, archaeologists were digging at the Saqqara necropolis. This is basically an ancient cemetery filled with tombs from some of Egypt's earliest dynasties. They were expecting to find something interesting, but what they uncovered was next level. A series of tombs, a bunch of artifacts, and most importantly, what might be the oldest and most complete mummy ever discovered in Egypt. Now, the star of the show, a guy named Hekashepes. His mummy was found at the bottom of a 50-foot, 15-meter shaft, tucked inside a massive limestone sarcophagus that weighed about 45 tons. Just to put that into perspective, the lid alone was 5 tons, so this wasn't just any burial, it was a serious flex. And when they finally cracked it open, the mummy was completely covered in layers of gold. That's the kind of burial reserved for the ultra-elite. Zahi Hawass, the famous Egyptologist leading the dig, was pretty hyped about it, saying the level of preservation and luxury suggested Hekashepes was a person of major importance. But that wasn't all. The team also found 4 more tombs, each belonging to powerful figures from Egypt's 5th and 6th dynasties, roughly 2500 to 2100 BC. There was Khnumjadef, a high-ranking priest and inspector of nobles, whose tomb was decorated with intricate scenes of daily life. Then there was Mary, whose title was Keeper of the Secrets and assistant to the great leader of the palace, which sounds incredibly mysterious, but basically means he was a trusted official. They also found the tombs of a priest and a judge or scribe named Fetek, all buried with objects meant to serve them in the afterlife. And just when you think it couldn't get better, they hit another jackpot, a separate 33-foot shaft full of artifacts, 14 stone statues, amulets, and carvings that gave more insight into the daily lives and religious beliefs of the time. These pieces weren't just decorations, they were snapshots of an ancient world carved in stone thousands of years ago. Saqqara has been a gold mine for discoveries for years, but this find was different. A 4,300-year-old mummy in pristine condition, a massive tomb complex, and artifacts that brought Egypt's old kingdom back to life. Speaking of old kingdoms, the Derinkuyu underground city being found was somehow even more shocking. Imagine you're knocking down a wall in your basement, just trying to do some home renovations, and suddenly you find a secret tunnel. That's already wild, right? Well, that's exactly what happened to a guy in Turkey in 1963. He broke through a wall and, instead of just finding pipes or old brick, he discovered a dark passage leading straight into history. That hole in his basement, it turned out to be the entrance to Derinkuyu, an entire underground city that had been hiding beneath the town for centuries. And when I say city, I mean city. This place is 18 stories deep, big enough to house 20,000 people, and fully equipped with kitchens, living quarters, wineries, storage rooms, stables, and even schools. It's not just some random caves. This was a fully functional society, underground. So, who built it? The exact origins are debated, but it's believed that the Phrygians or the Hittites started digging out these tunnels over 2,000 years ago. Later, early Christians expanded the city and used it as a hideout from persecution, and they weren't messing around. Derinkuyu wasn't just a place to crash, it was built for survival. The city had elaborate ventilation shafts to bring in fresh air, massive stone doors that could be rolled into place to block off sections in case of invaders, and escape tunnels leading to other underground cities. If someone attacked, they could just seal off the entrance and wait it out. The level of engineering here is honestly insane. You'd think an underground city this massive would have issues with air circulation, but no, there are more than 50 ventilation shafts designed to keep oxygen flowing. Water wells were strategically placed so that if enemies tried to poison the town's water supply from above, the lower levels would still have clean drinking water. They even had churches, meeting halls, and schools, meaning people lived here for long stretches of time. Derinkuyu is just one of many underground cities in the Cappadocia region. but it's easily the largest and most well-preserved. Today, parts of it are open for tourists, but archaeologists believe there are even deeper levels that haven't been fully excavated yet. So, somewhere beneath Turkey, entire sections of an ancient underground world are still waiting to be rediscovered. Kind of like how things went with Ata. In 2003, a guy was poking around an abandoned mining town in the Atacama Desert in Chile when he stumbled across something completely bizarre, a tiny, mummified body that looked way too strange to be human. This thing, nicknamed Ata, was only 6 inches long and had features that didn't make sense: an elongated skull, slanted eye sockets, and just 10 ribs instead of the usual 12. If you saw it, your first thought probably wouldn't be, "Oh, that's a person." It looked alien. And trust me, people ran with that theory. Some thought it was proof of extraterrestrial life, a crash-landed alien, or even some kind of secret government experiment gone wrong. Others speculated that it was an ancient, unknown species of human, something completely outside what we thought was possible. For years, no one had a solid explanation. Scientists couldn't immediately figure out what Ata was. It didn't match any known human deformities, and the skeletal structure seemed way too developed for its size. A normal human fetus wouldn't have fully developed bones like Ata did. Her skeleton had the structure of a child who had lived for at least 6 to 8 years. That's what made researchers scratch their heads. How could something that small have bones that looked like they belonged to an older child? It didn't make any sense. The lack of answers only fueled the alien theories. Ata's discovery gained international attention, and people were convinced that this was proof we weren't alone. But in 2018, researchers finally sequenced Ata's entire genome, hoping to put the mystery to rest once and for all. The results said that she was 100% human. She wasn't an alien, she wasn't a new species, she was a little girl. But that didn't mean the mystery was over. Ata had a series of genetic mutations that had never been seen before, affecting bone growth and development. These mutations likely caused her to have severe skeletal abnormalities, including dwarfism and scoliosis, which explained her strange proportions. Scientists believe she was a stillborn baby from an indigenous Chilean population, possibly one with rare genetic traits.
It occurred in 1947, just outside of Roswell, New Mexico, where a rancher...
Even after the DNA results came out, some people weren't convinced. A lot of people think that these DNA results were fake, and that they just said what they needed to say just so people would calm down and stop thinking that an alien has been found, because they did learn their lesson from Roswell. Back in 1947, a rancher named Mac Brazel was out checking his land near Roswell, New Mexico, when he stumbled across something straight up bizarre: shiny metal debris scattered everywhere. Some of it had weird symbols on it, and the material was weird. It was light as a feather, but couldn't be burned or broken. Whatever this stuff was, it wasn't normal. Brazel told the local sheriff, who told the military, and before you could say "little green men," the US Army rolled in, scooped up everything, and put out an official statement saying they had recovered a flying disc. That was it. Aliens had landed. The newspapers ran with the story, and for a second, it looked like the world was about to learn we weren't alone. Then, boom, total whiplash. The military backpedaled hard and suddenly claimed, actually, never mind. It was just a weather balloon. They hauled the wreckage away, told witnesses to keep their mouths shut, and acted like nothing had ever happened. But that only made people more suspicious. Why the sudden change? Why the secrecy? And most importantly, why were some locals whispering about seeing actual bodies? Over the years, the US government changed its story more times than anyone could count. First, it was a weather balloon. Then, in the 90s, they said, okay, fine, it was a top-secret spy balloon from Project Mogul meant to detect Soviet nukes. But by then, the Roswell story had taken on a life of its own. People were convinced the government wasn't just hiding a craft, they were hiding proof of extraterrestrial life. And then, in 2023, David Grush came along and flipped the whole thing on its head. This guy wasn't just some conspiracy theorist in a tinfoil hat. He was a high-level intelligence officer with access to some of the most classified programs on the planet. And what did he say? That the US government has been recovering non-human spacecraft for decades. Not only that, but they've been running highly classified programs to reverse engineer the technology, keeping it locked away from the public and even most politicians. And here's the part that had the world stop in its tracks. He didn't just say they've found spacecraft, he said they've found bodies. So now, the Roswell incident isn't just some Cold War mystery. It might have been the beginning of a cover-up that's still happening today. If Grush is telling the truth, then the question isn't whether aliens crashed in Roswell. The real question is, what else have they been hiding all these years? Because even when they're not hiding something, time does. Like it hid the Terracotta Army. Back in 1974, a group of farmers in Xi'an, China, were just minding their business, digging a well when they hit something solid. At first, they thought it was just some old pottery, no big deal. It wouldn't be the first time they found something like that. But as they dug a little more, they uncovered a full-sized human head made of clay. That's when things got weird. They kept digging, and more heads started showing up. Then torsos, then entire life-size soldiers, decked out in armor, standing in battle formation. They had just accidentally stumbled upon one of the most mind-blowing archaeological finds in history, the Terracotta Army. And when archaeologists got involved, they realized this wasn't just a few statues buried underground. This was a full military force, over 8,000 soldiers strong, built over 2,200 years ago. Not only that, but every single one of them was unique. Different facial features, different hairstyles, different expressions. It was like the emperor had an entire army custom-made, down to the last detail. And it wasn't just soldiers. There were also horses, chariots, archers, everything a ruler would need to conquer the afterlife. So who was the guy who needed his own personal underground army? That would be Qin Shi Huang, China's first emperor. He's the guy who unified China, built massive roads, started the Great Wall, and then apparently decided that dying wasn't going to stop him from ruling. So he ordered the construction of a literal underground kingdom where he could keep his power in the afterlife. The Terracotta Army was just the front line. And here's where it gets even crazier. His actual tomb has never been opened. Historians say that deep beneath a massive burial mound is Qin Shi Huang's underground palace, complete with treasures, a model of his empire, and rivers of liquid mercury. Ancient texts even claim the ceiling is painted like the night sky, filled with pearls to represent the stars. But we don't know for sure because archaeologists are too scared to open it. The levels of mercury detected in the area are insanely high, and there's a real risk of destroying whatever's inside just by exposing it to air. So for now, the Emperor's secrets stay buried.
That you can see tied to the Vatican museums, or you can see.
But if the guy went through all this effort just to build an afterlife empire, he had to know what he was doing, especially to just hide it all underground. That takes a lot of planning. And if anything can come close to that, it's the Vatican necropolis. Under the Grand St. Peter's Basilica, there's a hidden world most people don't even realize exists. The Vatican necropolis is a time capsule of ancient Rome, early Christianity, and one of history's biggest mysteries. Back in the 1st century AD, this place was nothing more than a Roman burial ground. Cremation was the norm, so the necropolis was filled with elaborate mausoleums, urns, and beautifully decorated sarcophagi. Basically, it was a final resting place for Rome's upper class. But as Christianity started spreading, everything changed. And the reason this site became legendary, St. Peter himself was buried here. According to tradition, Peter, the apostle, the first pope, Jesus' right-hand man, was crucified in Rome under Emperor Nero around 64 AD. His followers, despite the risks, buried him in a simple grave nearby. They probably had no idea that this modest burial site would shape the course of history. Fast forward to the 4th century, and Christianity wasn't some underground movement anymore, it was going mainstream. Emperor Constantine, the guy who legalized Christianity, decided to build a massive basilica right over Peter's grave. That structure eventually evolved into what we now know as St. Peter's Basilica, one of the most famous churches in the world. For centuries, people believed Peter's remains were somewhere under the basilica, but no one could say for sure. Then, in 1940, Pope Pius XII gave the go-ahead for a secret excavation beneath the church. What they found was mind-blowing. An entire underground city of tombs, covered in frescoes, mosaics, and mysterious inscriptions. But the biggest shock, a small niche with Greek graffiti reading Petros Eni, Peter is here. Inside, they found bones. Not just any bones, but the remains of a man in his 60s, missing his feet. That lines up pretty well with the belief that Peter was crucified upside down and then cut down from the cross. Beyond St. Peter, the necropolis tells the story of a civilization in transition. The tombs are a mashup of Roman pagan and Christian symbolism. Mythological gods on one side, Christian symbols like the chi-rho and the fish on the other. It's a rare, up-close look at how Rome slowly shifted from worshipping Jupiter and Mars to embracing Jesus Christ. Today, the Vatican necropolis is one of the most exclusive and mysterious places on Earth. Only a handful of visitors get to see it each day, and a lot of it is still buried, but no one dares to dig any deeper, afraid of what they might uncover. If you had the chance, which one of these would you want to see in person?